This is Paul. Jonathan Peugeot posted a number of hours ago, about 5 hours this morning. I saw it on Twitter. AI slop will drown us all. Apparently, someone has a Jonathan Peugeot biography on Amazon. Undoubtedly, you've got this face of someone doesn't look like Jonathan Peugeot at all, and this is Carving Meaning in a World Without Pattern by Joseph D. McCord. And it is probably something that Joseph D. McCord quickly ran up with AI and rushed it out to self-publish. If not, and you're Joseph D. McCord and you see this and you want to challenge me and say you wrote this thing, go right ahead. But given the fact that Jonathan Peugeot said AI slop will drown us all, leads me to believe that Joseph D. McCord didn't spend any time with Jonathan Peugeot to figure out what to write. I saw that after, so the Paul Kingsnorth talk at Touchstone it's unlisted. I think they're first sharing. I'll put a link in the notes below. I got the links from Annie Crawford, who was at Touchstone. I tried to confirm that these are for dissemination, but they're unlisted. So maybe there'll be some bigger rollout at some point. I don't know. I liked Paul's talk. Our own Michael Sartori has been waging a war against Paul Kingsnorth on Twitter. Sure, the New York Times is terrible, but you can't blame them for what they do with a mealy-mouthed, vibes-based gripe about some vague thing called the machine that is or isn't synonymous with other vague concepts called the West, which is why I remain against Paul Kingsnorth. So Michael Sartori has taken a stand against Paul Kingsnorth, just as Paul Kingsnorth is against the machine. I liked his talk at Touchstone, but I share some questions with Michael Sartori about the vagueness of this, and Paul's talk has prompted me to quite likely purchase his book in two forms, which will be the audio book and the Kindle book. And I do think it is I thought for a minute of purchasing the paper book, but then I saw that the paper book was $30 and the Kindle book was $14. And so cheat me will probably buy the Kindle book. But I immediately noticed that Reformation Manual for Paul Kingsnorth, Fight Against the Machine by Gavin McCullough, whoever that is this another AI book? I don't know. And then the most important lessons from Against the Machine workbook, a guided tour through Paul Kingsnorth's vision of resisting technology and reclaiming humanity. Is that an AI book? Maybe not. Maybe. We are in the age of slop. Now, there's some well, part of what I liked from these two Gray Hamilton conversations with Jordan is we got moments of pure Jordan Hall Doomerism. And I will drop those links in here. I will drop those clips in here for you now because I clipped them because they were so stark.
And I said this sort of thing a while back, even before becoming a Christian, which was for a very long time, thousands of years, there has been a conversation about the end of the world, and also a conversation about the necessity of repent and to sin no more. But now the material conditions are catching up with the spiritual proposition, meaning there is very little choice left but to fully commit yourself to discipleship. And I would say, in fact, there is no choice left, but there's a slack, a few years where you can pretend otherwise. You will be consumed, body, mind, and soul, by AI if you are not able to cleave utterly to Christ. For example, how do you go about bringing together a group of people who are able to hold together with fellowship in the context of the turbulence and the tribulation that is simply already upon us and is going to increase over time under every possible scenario? Well, there's only
that's the question.
That's the question, and the answer's in the book. Right? This is the thing. We could have gotten away with, and particularly in the context of this burst of neo-Nephilim, called the technological revolution, the industrial revolution, right? And the burst of wealth and the burst of material capacity and the burst of sorcery, like power, our ability to express our will in the world that happened from 1500 until yesterday. We were able to be inveigled to believe that under our own power, we could achieve the values that we value, and we could, in fact, discern and maintain those values. And it turns out all three of those are false. In reverse order. We actually have lost track of what values are. We've lost track of the ability to even distinguish between right values and wrong values for the most part in our culture. And as the wheels come off the bus and as the structures of technology, and I would say like General Motors is a structure of technology. Right? There's a variety of different variations in the word tech name, but you can see within that entire portfolio, as the wheels begin to come off of all of those different variations, we realize, which by the way, again, has always been the case in every individual life and throughout the whole of history, that we are utterly exposed to the working of the adversary. And so this is in some sense very beautiful. But the circumstance you find yourself in forces you to realize what Paul has been articulating. It forces you to say, whoa, yeah, I guess that's true. There is only one possible place. There's only one safety. There's only one peace. And there's only one way. And it's funny. And this is not like, I'm not saying that doctrinally. I'm saying it practically. It's like trying to think. Very, very much the metaphor of you're walking up a mountain path, or was it Karhadras in Lord of the Rings?
Yeah.
And they think, well, no, we'll go up the mountain, but you can't. The path is the way is shut, so we have to go through Moria. There is only one way. Not because we imagined it as such, not because somebody told us that, not because it's fancy, but rather that's just practically how it is. There is only one way. And so I guess the major point is to say, look, everybody, take a look at it. View what's happening from this lens. It's a lens that's both ancient, and you can see it on Paul's lips, and it's a lens that is incredibly prescient of what is coming. And recognize that the things that we had been conveyed, things that we had been torpified to believe were simply ordinary, like having a home to raise your kids in, frankly, being able to feed your family, are not and kind of have never been. But we were able to have this moment, 2-generation moment, the boomer moment, which they were born into that and have lived through it and will probably die just at the tail end of it. So from their point of view, it was always reality. But that was an incredible bubble. And and unfortunately, we lost track of the reality of it. We lost track of the stake and the responsibility and the degree to which we have drifted from anything vaguely like truly being able to be people who are worthy of having that responsibility. For those who are demoralized by the difficulties of what Ashir is articulating, I have that beautiful thing that is where the good news and the bad news are combined. And that is, if you haven't been paying attention, all the wheels are coming off the bus anyhow. Yeah. Pick any bus you like and pick any wheel. There will be no jobs in Mudville. Everybody's going to be unemployed. There will be no functional government of any sort. It's all going to be anarcho-tyranny up and down in every direction. Cities will begin to decay and fall apart. Housing prices will simultaneously be infinite, and there will be no ability for anybody to pay for them. But just sort of all this. Now, that is very bad news, but it's also very good news because all of that was death anyway. It was a beautiful trap that we were stuck in that we tried to swim against, but we couldn't swim against no matter how hard we tried. Now we have no choice but to actually find a way to live properly. So now we have both an invitation and a necessity. It was always the necessity, but now it's a very palpable necessity to say, okay, what does it look like for us to take a look at this problem holistically? You're going to have to solve the problem of where you're going to live. You're going to have to solve the problem of how do you find your proper vocation and give your value to a community in such a fashion that your community can share value in a way that creates a whole life for everybody. And inside of that, all the ingredients necessary to also prosecute education are available. So this is the operational directive. We have a journey, and that journey will probably be several generations. It's quite unlikely. Like I've been calling my generation the Moses generation as a generation. It's quite unlikely that we will get to the promised land, but we might be able to see the promised land if we get real high and have binoculars. Our eyes are going to be better. Let me fast forward. Let's jump forward like a generation or two. So we're like, call it 80 years in the future. In the future, access to the internet will be very limited, and it will involve, it'll be liturgical, all of it, all access to the digital will be liturgical. So if you want to get on the internet, you will have to climb a local mountain, and you will have to go into the monastery. You will have to fast for a day. You have to undergo certain ablutions, and then you'll get onto the internet. It'll be a kind of a monastic sensibility. And therefore, of course, most people won't. People may have private local nets that are highly encrypted, that they're operating in the local environment, like walkie-talkies or something like that sensibility. Like only people on the local net can communicate. But everybody will have their private, Great Wall of China. The open internet, the thing that communicates between, will have significant boundaries, including an entire group of people who and liturgies that are necessary to participate. That's the actual end state. That's the only way that it works at the end of this thing.
That's a beautiful dystopia.
Well, and your local environment is quite beautiful, quite naturally beautiful, quite connected. Like the land where you live with really high intimacy. Like you know the flowers, you know the trees, you know the animals, you know the water, and you know all the people, and you know how to be in very close relationship with it very, very well.
But you don't know that there's people being bombed in Somalia anymore?
Probably not. If you do, it's because you're supposed to. There's no point in my 6-year-old daughter has no need to know that right now, because there's nothing she can do about it. So if your agency, if information systematically,
are you suggesting we build digital gardens? What?
No, I'm suggesting we build natural gardens, and then we connect those natural gardens digitally through boundaries that have the appropriate discernment to make sure that what's flowing through them is not hazardous to the interior.
All right, but the people in the garden can still order Uber Eats, right?
Probably not, actually.
No,
probably not. Sorry.
Oh no, your dystopian nightmare is crushing.
No, probably not Uber Eats. I hate to say it. You probably can get a feast day. There will probably be profound feast days where multiple different groups will come together, many of which may actually pilgrimage from one place to another.
God bless feast days.
God bless feast days. Yeah, much better than Uber Eats.
Let's spin it. Okay, so all right, I'll be one of the fellas on the wall. How do I find the others?
You're on the wall. Okay, so
I decided I'll take the black. Whatever, man. Let's go. Yeah. Where do I sign up? What do I do now? Where do I learn what I need to know?
So there's this. This is probably going to end up being a meta guild. So think of it almost like a knighthood. So you've now become a knight of St. John, and
we like St. Christopher the dog-headed. I think.
Nice. Okay, that's a good one. Knight of St. Christopher the dog-headed. So you enter into that guild, and that guild is orthogonal, meaning you as a Knight of St. Christopher are simultaneously vertically integrated into your garden, into your kingdom, and horizontally integrated into other knights of this sacred knighthood. And you are mutually supportive, meaning if necessary, you will come to the banner, a call of other knights to protect their particular kingdom, even if it's not your kingdom under attack, and vice versa. And you're also mutually training. Right? So there's a process of forcing and pushing each other to be quite capable of holding the responsibility that you're holding vertically and horizontally.
And I find the others at these full moon estuary potluck dinner campouts.
You'll go on pilgrimages. You'll walk across the land. You will go into locations that will have high discernment and high ambiguity. You'll tune into this conversation, and you'll be like, "Who the fuck are these guys?"
And why are they saying what I need to hear?
That seems very unsettling and dangerous. What do I do next? Okay. And then you start to follow that. And that's part of the initiation, by the way. Part of the initiation is mystery and the occult, in the sense of not the occult in the simple sense, the occult in the sense of like obscure because it needs to be obscure so that the truth is perceived only by those for whom that truth is proper. The bat signal is a vernacular way of saying it. And then you'll get pulled in and you'll be initiated. And as you're initiated, there will be a process of being able to identify where should you be. Maybe you should be in the Knights of St. John, not the Knights of St. Christopher.
They're a good group. They're a good group.
Yeah, we like them, but they're a little bit,
You got to be willing to eat the locust for that one, though. So it's a deal breaker sometimes.
Right, because people have proper place. And it's funny because I'm sure you've heard this McLuhan quote of the maybe you haven't because I may have hallucinated it. Digital retrieves the medieval. But
no, but I'm intrigued.
It's definitely worth pulling on that thread. That's part of what's coming up here, is that a lot of what we're going to see in the era of the digital, as we're moving into that, is going to look quite significantly like the medieval. So you will have guild structures, you will have knights of holy orders, you will have kingdoms that have profound vertical depth, and vertical going all the way up to Christ and down all the way into the soil. Because these are proper, the image of those orders map to the kinds of things that happen in a digital environment, a truly digital environment.
Mooks and knights. Yeah.
So that's quite a run of clips, isn't it? You listen to those clips and it's like, oh, and of course I can get a little doomerist myself. One of the big transitions I think that we are making right now is a transition from the physical to the virtual. That on one level seems obvious, but when, for example, we compare political violence from 50 years ago till now, we might say that the rhetoric is hot, but the physicality is less. And I think this in some ways connects with Jordan Hall's fifth dimensional warfare, where the kinetic is sublimated by the rhetorical and the virtual. And so what we tend to see is really fierce language online, but the realities of disrupting the electrical grid, the internet, new sales of video games, Netflix, food distribution, all of these things would simply be too costly, that there's sort of a physicalist secularism that gets enforced. And Christianity is sort of behind that. Don't starve people. Don't, and there's maybe a universal basic income that comes up and says, we can have our war between right and left, but we don't really want people to die in this. We sort of want everybody in their little Netflix boxes we call apartments, sitting there with their game controllers and their keyboards, screaming at each other, maybe fragging each other on video games. But for the most part, the electricity stays on. DoorDash keeps coming to the door. And whether or not we reproduce, well, this is actually part of the reproductive question, which is, children really get in the way of playing your video games. And so if you really love your video games, let's not have any and just keep our own little mental wars going on while we just sort of age and age and age. And then when we get to a point where we can't see well enough and we can't make screens big enough and we can't hear well enough, well, then maid comes and takes out our life, cleans up the apartment for the next rabbit to inhabit the virtual studio.
Well,
boy, that's dystopian.
Well, someone mentioned in the chat on YouTube the WEF stuff, and I've been thinking about this. Is you will get in the pods and you will eat the bugs, but like we're already there, yeah, it's not dimensional. I wasn't going to bring that up.
Generational, yeah.
But I'll speak about me and my own personal degeneracy for a moment. I love scotch, and I love marijuana, and I love women, and I have, for the past 3 weeks, despite what you may see online, I've avoided all three. And as I told my priest the other day, I feel so much vigor that I feel a strong desire to lay siege to a city. And and what I think is happening is it's the video games is part of it, the Netflix is part of it. Not having a feast and fast cycle, always filling your belly with the DoorDash. The easy access to whatever form of marijuana is legal in your region, the drinking of the alcohol, and the easy release through online imagery of women. It anesthetizes the aggression and disagreeableness of men. And it's not so much that we're venting through discussion online and stuff that is taking the pressure off there being actual steady violence. It's that we have chemically emasculated and neutered men to the point that there's no capability of engaging in actual warfare anymore on any scale.
Physical warfare.
Yeah. And so basically, it's just we've chemically castrated all the men in the West through easy pleasure seeking, and we've depleted their vigor, and the lack of physical fitness, which can be the obesity issue, but often it's just being so sedentary that you don't build up that physical capacity. And as anybody who has the misfortune of following me on Twitter and or Instagram, I'm consistently posting workout videos. So
that's better than the internet, girls.
So like a physical re-embodiment of masculinity and giving up these easy pleasures that are sapping your vigor is what we need. But when men come around to that, there's going to be actual bombs going off in places.
Well, that's a limbic hack, right, Paul? And I think one of the things is, like, for what purpose, to use a bit of Marxist language, for what purpose is the value of all these generations being extracted, right? And is it simply a run mill to extract as much value of me out, right? I've had children. That was actually counterproductive, since somebody else elsewhere in the world could have had children at a cheaper marginal rate than me, right? And I could have just continued to be in my house consuming. I own, but my house was expensive because it was ridiculous, because there's like everywhere else in the West, a housing crisis, right? Or I could be renting and I could be paying half my salary to rent, right? You are squeezing in an optimized fashion every ounce out of me, right? And I don't like that. And I would just very quickly wrap up, Paul. Like, the war is not kinetic, but if the demographic impact of it is such that the pyramid collapses in, right, at the bottom, in a manner equivalent to a whole generation, like the Ukrainian men who die will never have children, right? That's functionally the same as what's happening in South Korea, right? Where they are simply just being squeezed like oranges. So there's kinetic war, there's fifth/sixth generation war, and there's a singular outcome of man used as a product.
But we've always known that men are not the bottleneck in physical reproduction. It's women. Genghis Khan demonstrated that.
Well, I mean, up until 3 weeks ago, while Paul was sipping scotch in Austin, I'm on these construction sites and I see plenty of manly vigor. And then most of those, a good number of those guys, after they get done building houses, are getting in their car and they're driving around to deliver Paul's DoorDash and, to pay for diapers and stuff like that. So, I mean, it's hard. And I think there's not a good path, but like, it's not, like this is just why, like, I can't deal with the Doomerism. Like, I went through the whole thing. I went through all the conspiracies, and then I just was like, okay, but God is more powerful than this. And, and there are these things like I think this is kind of the problem, is that in some sense that we are maybe like so much of what we see on the internet is just whatever it is. It's all gonna whatever it's showing you, it's gonna show it to you in a more negative than reality way. Because it's more salient and it gets you hooked more, and like so it is a messy thing, because it's like I'm on these spaces, and I'm not I do my fair amount deal of complaining about things. Some of this is just me saying I don't know how to solve these problems. There are maybe ways. I don't know how to reach the people that maybe have more influence to help do things. But it's not like when you give into despair, like that's when it's over. So I'm not going to do that. And I think that there are many more people that are not despairing. Like, I mean, I think that the event, the response to the events of the Charlie Kirk's, after his memorial and all that has been mostly positive. And, I've seen a few people that are on the like, this doesn't prove, this just proves that speech doesn't work. We need to adopt violence. And like, it's like, these are just childish men who have, they've taken this red pill of like this macho version of masculinity that is such an online construct. It's the male to male transgender. They've become the extreme version of male. Yeah, there's female to female. That's what's on OnlyFans.
Whoa. So again, Michael Sartori sort of props up the bottom for us. So thank you, Michael, for being our voice of optimism. One of the videos that, in the rush of things, I really didn't give enough treatment to is I really liked this turn in terms of noticing trust, because let's
reality in a reliable, not a perfect, because there is no perfect algorithm, but in a reliable manner. And I suppose that's part of where I want to start. The reason why I think trust is really important. I mean, and Karen, of course, I'm acknowledging right off the bat all the important, sociocultural, downstream effects that you're talking about. But like I said, I want to do what you were originally talking about. I want to get as upstream as possible first. And so it seems to me that we're coming to a recognition that the Enlightenment, meaning the period that started modernity, its recommendation, it's very strongly internalized in our culture, recommendation that we pursue certainty, and that will give us what we need in order to alleviate existential anxiety, coordinate our labor, and achieve the good life. We will seek certainty. That has collapsed. That project of we will base our lives and our community and our science and our literature on this quest for certainty, epitomized by Descartes and Leibniz, right? That has collapsed. And I'm not going to, if anybody wants, if either one of you want, there's just all kinds of reasons from science, epistemology, critical theory, history, right? Everything. So we can't rely on that. And the problem is we undermined a lot of the old systems that were trust-based as we tried to replace them with certainty-based systems.
Okay. Now, one of the interesting things, and I haven't picked up Paul's book yet, even though I might after I finish recording this. I've got to, and as a pastor, one of my jobs we joke about Uber Eats. One of my jobs as pastor is I'm basically an Uber sometimes. So there are people in the church or connected to the church that don't have a car or don't have money for a car or don't have money for an Uber. And so pastor is Uber of last resort. But but that's often a good time, because then, especially if it's not a person of the church, but a person connected to the church, that I get to have maybe a half hour, an hour of car time with a person whose family member or loved one goes to church, but they don't come to church. And it's just pastoral time of being with them. This video has already taken a different turn than what I thought. Part of what I liked about what Paul Kingsnorth talked about is he went into Lewis Mumford. And Calvin College, used to be college, had a J term. And one of the early J terms I took with Howard Rienstra was a study of this massive book called The City and History by Lewis Mumford. And one of the things that Paul does, which is interesting, is he makes the point that that a bunch of his stuff he's actually getting from Lewis Mumford. And Lewis Mumford was one of these big picture historians, and tried to sort of zoom out and look at, really big history. So the city and history all in one book. I'll see if I can turn my fan on and not have it destroy the sound with these new filters, thanks to Stetson complaining in the comments about the noise. Is there a different noise now that I've turned my fan on than what I did before? It sounds better in my ears anyway. Sorry for this little technical moment of technical interlude in a video that is talking about Paul Kingsnorth and Against the Machine. Kingsnorth, he did this a bit with his Mary Harrington conversation too, but Kingsnorth, I think, rightly goes back before the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment has sort of become this bad guy, and Protestantism has sort of become this bad guy, and everybody's right now, and the Enlightenment and Protestantism are sort of our favorite whipping boys. But I think Kingsnorth is right when he looks at Mumford and says, actually, at least in terms of how we can record this goes further back, let's say, to Egypt. And what the industrial age did, and I think we should have a bit of appreciation for the industrial age, because in many respects, the industrial age is the substitution of wood power, steam power, cold power, petroleum power, nuclear power, all of these powers, these engines, the replacement of human muscle power and animal muscle power with these other, often fossil fuels, these other machines that very quickly outstripped us. And now, of course, we're at the brink of this, our anxiety about this AI revolution that's going to really upend all of this. And another thing that I appreciated about Paul's talk was at the end of the talk, he basically was very open about the fact that we don't know. And this, of course, touches on, it was funny because at Midwestuary, when we had that big talk with myself and Peugeot and Vervaeke, I felt really bad about, I felt like I'd sort of hogged it, and they didn't interrupt me and they didn't stop for questions. Sam and Chad were like, go, go, go. And it got focused on AI rather than some other topics that it could have with respect to the conference. But this is sort of the cusp of the issue right now. And again, I really appreciate how John is forming it in this conversation about trust.
And what Weber talks about, this is bureaucracy. Bureaucracy is we're going to replace a trust network, like a kinship network, with a system based on obtaining certainty, or at least trying to approximate.
And one of the comments I made yesterday, which I made a little clip, maybe I'll just drop it right in. I don't think this Orthodox moment we're seeing now is fundamentally about the theology or the icons or the liturgy. And I'm not saying those things don't make contributions for individuals and their reasons to pursue the Orthodox Church. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying fundamentally What's happening with the Orthodox Church in America is part of this cycle of taking apart institutions and putting them back together again. This is Paul. Jonathan Peugeot posted a number of hours ago, about 5 hours this morning, I saw it on Twitter. AI slop will drown us all. Apparently someone has a Jonathan Peugeot biography on Amazon, undoubtedly. You've got this face of someone, doesn't look like Jonathan Peugeot at all. And this is Carving Meaning in a World Without Pattern by Joseph D. McCord. And it is probably something that Joseph D. McCord quickly ran up with AI and rushed it out to self-publish. If not, and you're Joseph D. McCord and you see this and you want to challenge me and say you wrote this thing, go right ahead. But given the fact that Jonathan Peugeot said AI slop will drown us all, leads me to believe that Joseph D. McCord didn't spend any time with Jonathan Peugeot to figure out what to write. I saw that after, so the Paul Kingsnorth talk at Touchstone it's unlisted. I think they're first sharing. I'll put a link in the notes below. I got the links from Annie Crawford, who was at Touchstone. I tried to confirm that these are for dissemination, but they're unlisted. So maybe there'll be some bigger rollout at some point. I don't know. I liked Paul's talk. Our own Michael Sartori has been waging a war against Paul Kingsnorth on Twitter. Sure, the New York Times is terrible, but you can't blame them for what they do with a mealy-mouthed, vibes-based gripe about some vague thing called the machine that is or isn't synonymous with other vague concepts called the West, which is why I remain against Paul Kingsnorth. So Michael Sartori has taken a stand against Paul Kingsnorth, just as Paul Kingsnorth is against the machine. I liked his talk at Touchstone, but many of I share some questions with Michael Sartori about the vagueness of this, and Paul's talk has prompted me to quite likely purchase his book in two forms, which will be the audio book and the Kindle book. And I do think it is I thought for a minute of purchasing the paper book, but then I saw that the paper book was $30 and the Kindle book was $14. And so cheat me will probably buy the Kindle book. But I immediately noticed that Reformation Manual for Paul Kingsnorth, Fight Against the Machine by Gavin McCullough, whoever that is this another AI book? I don't know. And then the most important lessons from Against the Machine workbook, a guided tour through Paul Kingsnorth's vision of resisting technology and reclaiming humanity. Is that an AI book? Maybe not. Maybe. We are in the age of slop. Now, there's some well, part of what I liked from these two Gray Hamilton conversations with Jordan is we got moments of pure Jordan Hall doomerism. And I will drop those links in here. I will drop those clips in here for you now because I clipped them because they were so stark. So that's quite a run of clips, isn't it? Listen to those clips and it's like, oh, and of course I can get a little doomerist myself. So again, Michael Sartori sort of props up the bottom for us. So thank you, Michael, for being our voice of optimism. One of the videos that in the rush of things I really didn't give enough treatment to is I really liked this turn in terms of noticing trust, because let's
reality in a reliable, not a perfect, because there is no perfect algorithm, but in a reliable manner. And I suppose that's part of where I want to start. The reason why I think trust is really important. I mean, and Karen, of course, I'm acknowledging right off the bat all the important, sociocultural, downstream effects that you're talking about. But like I said, I want to do what you were originally talking about. I want to get as upstream as possible first. And so it seems to me that we're coming to a recognition that the Enlightenment, meaning the period that started modernity, its recommendation, it's very strongly internalized in our culture, recommendation that we pursue certainty, and that will give us what we need in order to alleviate existential anxiety, coordinate our labor, and achieve the good life. We will seek certainty. That has collapsed. That project of we will base our lives and our community and our science and our literature on this quest for certainty, epitomized by Descartes and Leibniz, right? That has collapsed. And I'm not going to, if anybody wants, if either one of you want, there's just all kinds of reasons from science, epistemology, critical theory, history, right? Everything. So we can't rely on that. And the problem is we undermined a lot of the old systems that were trust-based as we tried to replace them with certainty-based systems.
Okay. Now, one of the interesting things, and I haven't picked up Paul's book yet, even though I might after I finish recording this, I've got to, and as a pastor, one of my jobs we joke about Uber Eats. One of my jobs as pastor is I'm basically an Uber sometimes. So there are people in the church or connected to the church that don't have a car or don't have money for a car or don't have money for an Uber. And so pastor is Uber of last resort. But that's often a good time, because then, especially if it's not a person of the church, but a person connected to the church, that I get to have maybe a half hour, an hour of car time with a person whose family member or loved one goes to church, but they don't come to church. And it's just pastoral time of being with them. This video has already taken a different turn than what I thought. Part of what I liked about what Paul Kingsnorth talked about is he went into Lewis Mumford. And Calvin College, used to be college, had a J term. And one of the early J terms I took with Howard Rienstra was a study of this massive book called The City and History by Lewis Mumford. And one of the things that Paul does, which is interesting, is he makes the point that that a bunch of his stuff he's actually getting from Lewis Mumford. And Lewis Mumford was one of these big picture historians, and tried to sort of zoom out and look at, really big history. So the city and history all in one book. I'll see if I can turn my fan on and not have it destroy the sound with these new filters, thanks to Stetson complaining in the comments about the noise. Is there a different noise now that I've turned my fan on than what I did before? It sounds better in my ears anyway. Sorry for this little technical moment of technical interlude in a video that is talking about Paul Kingsnorth and Against the Machine. Kingsnorth, he did this a bit with his Mary Harrington conversation too, but Kingsnorth, I think, rightly goes back before the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment has sort of become this bad guy, and Protestantism has sort of become this bad guy, and everybody's right now, and the Enlightenment and Protestantism are sort of our favorite whipping boys. But I think Kingsnorth is right when he looks at Mumford and says, actually, at least in terms of how we can record this goes further back, let's say, to Egypt. And what the industrial age did, and I think we should have a bit of appreciation for the industrial age, because in many respects, the industrial age is the substitution of wood power, steam power, cold power, petroleum power, nuclear power, all of these powers, these engines, the replacement of human muscle power and animal muscle power with these other, often fossil fuels, these other machines that very quickly outstripped us. And now, of course, we're at the brink of this, our anxiety about this AI revolution that's going to really upend all of this. And another thing that I appreciated about Paul's talk was at the end of the talk, he basically was very, very open about the fact that we don't know. And this, of course, touches on, it was funny because at Midwestuary, when we had that big talk with myself and Peugeot and Vervaeke, I felt really bad about, I felt like I'd sort of hogged it, and they didn't interrupt me and they didn't stop for questions. You know, Sam and Chad were like, go, go, go. And it got focused on AI rather than some other topics that it could have with respect to the conference. But this is sort of the cusp of the issue right now. And again, I really appreciate how John is forming it in this conversation about trust.
And what Weber talks about, this is bureaucracy. Bureaucracy is we're going to replace a trust network, like a kinship network, with a system based on obtaining certainty, or at least trying to approximate.
And one of the comments I made yesterday, which I made a little clip, maybe I'll just drop it right in, was in noticing sort of for the first time. That's why I do these videos. I do these videos so I can notice things, because the act of talking them through, the act of sort of processing them, forces me to slow down and notice some things. And when Paul Kingsnorth was talking to John Heers about pilgrimage and all of these ancient practices that are being brought back into the present, it's a reinstitutionalization and actually a repolicing. Part of what struck me about the canonization of Charlie Kirk, which followed the canonization of George Floyd, and in some ways their respective churches are canonizing them. And you might say, well, Charlie Kirk is an evangelical Protestant. They don't have saints the way the Orthodox and the Catholics do. True, but neither does whatever church it was that canonized George Floyd, and on and on and on and on. We've had deinstitutionalization and reinstitutionalization. A lot of this has come as because of trust. Now, John nicely said, we quested for certainty, and in some ways, institutions are human stabilizing systems. Okay, that's what human institutions are. So let's say you meet a girl and you like the girl and you want to be with the girl and you want to have sex with the girl and you want to have children with the girl. Marriage is to stabilize that relationship and say, you're going to be together whether you like her or not. Once you commit to this commitment is going to bring you into the future. I was talking to someone about something I think about often in terms of the upsides and downsides of employees versus volunteers, because churches often work much more from the labor of volunteers. And you have a lot more control over an employee within an institution than you have over a volunteer, because a volunteer could say, well, I'm going to come this day, but I'm not going to come that day. I'm going to do this, but I'm not going to do that. And when you've got an employee, you've got quite a bit more leverage, because it's like, well, you're going to do this and this and this and this, as long as it's reasonable and within the job description, or you're not going to get paid. And if you don't get paid, then maybe you won't eat, or you'll lose your home, or your spouse will get mad at you for not bringing home the bacon, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so part of what institutions do, and part of why they're connected with certainty, is because we trust in them, because there's policing, there's accountability, there's all of these things are built in. And this is where this use of the word professional comes in. Well, I am a professional. What does that mean? It means I'm accountable. I'm under authority. And now, of course, now you can begin to say, oh yeah, these ancient churches that have accountability and authority, and this younger generation that had lived life of too much chaos, and the how many of the institutions let them down, and so they're now seeking other institutions and hoping that these other institutions, maybe because they're very old, or maybe because they talk a big game in terms of authority, or for whatever reason, or maybe because they go all the way up to God and they have this chain of hands that goes all the way down to Jesus. Well, maybe then I can trust in this institution. And a big part of what's happening, I think, with the AI slop is that we're I don't know that Joseph D. McCord is even a real person. Joseph D. McCord might be a front for Grok or ChatGPT. And certainly the picture on the front doesn't look anything like Jonathan Peugeot. Where's the man bun? You know, and which era of Jonathan Peugeot is it? I actually regularly think of the fact that I am an unkempt person, and that my beard is sometimes short and sometimes long, and my office is messy. And if someone wants to sort of make an AI facsimile of this, they're going to have to fudge the combinatorial explosiveness of the mess in my office, because my mess in my office changes every day. And one of these days I'm going to clean it up. And then it'll get a little bit messy again, just sort of like my beard. One of these days I'm going to clean it up, and then it'll get messy again. And, you know, I can, you know, somebody get these little different spots on my head because, you know, especially like where my hat goes, because I never go outside without a hat anymore because I don't want my head to fry in the bright California sun. And so then sometimes, you know, you'll get pimples and zits across the headband and all this stuff. So I think trust apocalypse is the right language. And it's going to be because Rod Dreher said over and over and over again when he was at Midwestuary, that, and often when he wrote in his blogs after Midwestuary, young people no longer trust in institutions. And it doesn't mean that there won't be institutions in the future. It'll just mean they're going to switch to different institutions. And the cycle of what's been happening with religious institutions is very interesting. One of the things I've sort of been going through lately is the Rest is History's back catalog on the history of Ireland. And because just like Japan in the Second World War, Ireland has this very interesting relationship between in some ways, a fairly monolithic culture, at least a culture with some borders on it that you can see. It's also an island, and religion. And I talked about the Meiji Restoration with Japan and the cult of the emperor, how that factored into the Second World War. And of course, you've got Ireland and the Catholic Church and the different way after the Reformation, sort of the Protestant English and the Irish Catholic sort of move back and forth. And then yesterday I played this I had the date wrong. It's 2016 for the Easter Rising in 2016, which I'm listening to now. Fascinating event I knew nothing about, and I'm really interested in sort of seeing how Ireland comes to be what it is now, because again, I've been to Ireland twice and I love going to new places. And it's, you know, I was in Northern Ireland before this time. I was in Dublin and then Galway, and just super interesting, but caught this this comment.
Historian Michael Laffan says of this period that it is the greatest crisis to confront a British government since the civil wars of the 17th century. So presumably you would agree with that.
I do agree. And as I said at the start of this discussion, this is the last time that religion really seriously mattered, but it's also the last time that Ireland really mattered in British politics. Because I think that even at the height of the Troubles, what was happening in Northern Ireland didn't really affect the outcome of British general elections.
No, not at all.
It was a serious issue, but it didn't really change how people voted, I wouldn't say. Maybe it contributed to people rewarding the Labour government after the Good Friday Agreement or whatever, but it never really mattered again, arguably until 2014 in the Scottish independence referendum. The Union had been a dead issue for a long time. But it goes back to my original point that the First World War changed everything. Everything was changed utterly. as soon as war is declared, the British government introduces what's called a suspensory act, which is to say we won't enact the Home Rule for Ireland until at least 1 year after the cessation of hostilities. They had no idea how long the war was going to end. So the Irish issue is effectively parked. But I think there are bigger issues that happen in the course of the First World War. The extension of the franchise in 1918, the exhaustion of the First World War. No one wants to go back to what Churchill called the dreary steeples of Fermanagh and Tyrone. Irish issues were the last thing on Britain's mind, even in the teeth of an Irish war of independence and then civil war. People just weren't as bothered as they once were. And I've got this hunch that for a lot of people, the social mixing in the trenches of the First World War was another decisive factor, because people didn't used to mix across religious lines. People had been taught for centuries that Catholics were this disloyal fifth column in Britain. And then they served alongside them in the trenches, and they saw how brave they were. They saw how gallant their Irish Roman Catholic chaplains were, and they went, do you know what? They're actually all right, this lot. It was all nonsense what we were told.
Isn't there a more cynical explanation, though? I mean, in Ronan Fanning's book that we've mentioned a few times, Fatal Path, one of the reasons he says in his preface that he wrote that book was because he wants to show, to some degree, that violence worked. The violence, radicalization won, that it got results. He doesn't necessarily like it, but that's how he sees it. Couldn't you say that the reason the issue fades for people in Britain is that the Ulster Unionists won? They got what they wanted by arming, by marching, by making the great hullabaloo with their Tory allies. They were excluded from Home Rule. They eventually get their own parliament. I mean, they didn't necessarily want their own parliament to begin with, but they get their own parliament. They get the 6-county state that they wanted, but they get their way, as in fact, of course, to the Catholic Irish nationalists. Both sides get their way. And so that's why it's settled to some degree, isn't it? I mean, there are people who lose out, obviously, which are the kind of minorities either side of the border, especially in the north. But those two majorities, if you like, both win. And so people in Britain say, great, they've won, let them crack on. Don't you think?
Yeah, I think that's right. And I've got a lot of sympathy for Ronan Fanning's view on that question. Even Carson actually looks back on that period and writes in the early 1920s to say we were just a pawn in a political game. We were used. Our campaign was used by the Tories to get back in power. I don't quite believe. I align more with your take on this and Ronan Fanning's take that to a lot of British people this seems like a sensible solution. It's not ideal. It's settled. We're not going to impose anything on the Protestants of Northern Ireland as it became. So let's just leave it.
But do you think also, Dan, that the reason that people in Britain don't remember this is because they have chosen not to remember it? Because actually it threatens the idea of British politics as always having been pacific, constitutional, law-based. We don't want to remember how effective violence actually was in an immense constitutional issue. I mean, one that ends up ripping a chunk of the United Kingdom away.
Yes, I think that's a really good point. I think that this whole period, that's why I mentioned at the start that people's slightly sepia-tinged view of the Edwardian period as this Indian summer, as I mentioned, is completely false. And I don't know where that comes from. Maybe it was a deliberate thing because people could remember how febrile, how potentially violent it could have easily become in Britain, if not in Ireland itself. And so this story has been largely buried for decades.
But surely the answer to that is, to both of those things, it goes back to the thing you said right at the beginning, Dan, about the Great War changing everything. The Great War eclipses this in the national imagination. Of course, people are always going to remember the Somme, Passchendaele, Ypres, rather than constitutional wranglings about the Home Rule Act, and then a lot of paramilitary violence that kind of doesn't quite happen. So it's a bigger story. But also, it's because of the Great War that people construct this fantasy image of what life was like before the war, don't you think? Because they're dreaming of a lost golden age, before this, these hundreds of thousands of people were killed.
Never such innocence.
Yeah, I completely agree. And actually, there's potentially another angle as well, which was the places that were so important in that story before the First World War. If I take Liverpool, for example, they were never as prominent again as in the national conversation. Leading politicians, Harold Wilson, of course, in the 1960s, the cities like Liverpool, the North, Scotland, were never quite as important as they once were in the national conversation as they were before 1914. So the prospect of violence in Liverpool and Glasgow is a very different proposition in 1914 as it would have been in the 1980s.
Right. So the United Kingdom in 1914 does not erupt into violence, but we have a sense that in some way.
And then listening to the Easter Rising in 1916, it's an astounding thing where they tried to collaborate with the Germans in the middle of the First World War to orchestrate an uprising in Ireland to break it off. And of course, what happens is just complete disaster. It's even comic at points, but that business about religion and its movement from religious institutions, I think, very much to governmental institutions. And again, the conversation was with Ross Douthat and Ezra Klein, where Klein basically offers his confession that government plus technology will solve all our problems. And government plus technology plus maybe wealth can resolve, can mend the wounds of past historical injustices. And part of what we're seeing, I think, with all of this is, I don't think we're going to get there. I retweeted Jonathan's tweet. I said, AI is the new marketing. There's a small but determined group of us who are always pushing back again from always selling. And it struck me that when I watch YouTube, so much Christian YouTube is always selling. It's always selling. It's be a Catholic, be Orthodox, be a Christian, be Reformed, do this, do that, buy Dove soap, eat Cadbury chocolate, vote Democrat, vote Republican, vote Labor, vote, it's just always selling, and our side is right and their side is wrong, and just sell. And there's just an exhaustion from that. And to the point that people click on the videos of those who are selling what they've already bought. And they do that to self-soothe. And so then we set up this machine to be always selling. And now with AI, it's listening to this morning, whether or not YouTube is going to win the war against AI is really a question, because you can just upload so much slop. And so often when I'm looking for something, and I do sometimes use AI elements in a thumbnail, like in yesterday's thumbnail, I wanted a big vat of stew, so I had AI just give me a big vat of stew, and then I could stick, people in it. And so we're going to be, I think, this trust apocalypse is going to push us more towards persons and physicality. And even though, as Paul Kingsnorth notes, people were the original machines that we employed. Just even look at the lamps. We employed employment. Human resources. I mean, it's right there in front of us. And there's going to be an interesting exchange, because this trust apocalypse doesn't mean that, okay, well, now we're no longer going to trust in institutions, we're going to trust in people. But people are still people, and they will let you down. And so I think it will be, as I said in that little clip, I think it's going to be a churn, and it's going to be a trust back towards different institutions. I think it's going to be an institutional changing of the guard, and there's going to be aspects of these institutions. Now, whether Jordan Hall's vision of Bitcoin monastery, or however he would call it, whether that's going to come to truth, I don't know. Will YouTube have to ban? Will they have an algorithm that can suss out they already can't suss out the lesser videos, because again, it's collective relevance realization that we are in fact doing. think part of the exhaustion is, the always selling exhaustion, and then the slop exhaustion. It's going to drive us to Sunday morning. We had, so Classis now has a program that I've been looking at Classis to start for a couple of years because I knew Living Stones would need it, where we've got some retired pastors that are very much trusted and liked and skilled and gifted, who are going to sort of come alongside smaller churches that are having viability conversations. So, and our church is the guinea pig now. So my friends Bruce and Al, I went out to breakfast with them last week and just talked about it. They wanted to part of their job is to care for me. Part of their job is to care for the church. There's no bishops in the Christian Reformed Church. They don't tell the church what to do, but they build credibility with presence, and then they assist wherever it seems that they can. And it was so good to have them here on Sunday. And Al lives a little further down the valley, so he wasn't able to make it to Estuary. But Bruce and his wife came to Estuary. And as often is the case, it's so interesting for me watching the responses to people when they come into Estuary, because they have all these different filters. And of course, the pastors and the church people come in with certain filters because they think it's like, is this Bible study? Like, what is this? And then I explain what this is, and then we do what this is. And they're like, oh, this is really good. Yeah. And it's a little hard for especially pastors to not be really churchy in their expectations and assumptions, which, especially in a very mixed room like Estuary, sort of comes forward. But I just caught the end of John Vervaeke talking to Elizabeth Oldfield, and he was talking about, sounded like sort of something similar to Estuary, this little practice that they have to sort of provoke dialogos. And I'm not gonna like have a pit one against the other. I'm not gonna do that. But I think a big part of another sense that I had during Midwestuary, especially in our little Estuary group that wasn't recorded, obviously, was listening to people, this sense of collapse and then reconstruction and reintegration. And that's happening at many different levels. People are doing it in terms of their faith. And of course, their faith is sort of the most basic thing, the most basic filter. It's the most basic frame. And I think once people sort of get that to a place that they feel confidence in it and trust in it and have reestablished trusting relationships, they then move on to other things, other ways of rebuilding. I've been doing, I still haven't sort of figured out what to do with Randos conversations. They're ongoing, but lately I've had a lot of Randos conversations that have basically been pastoral conversations. That has always been an element of it, but in many of the cases, they've been people who sometimes they have a church. They often have a church. When I started the Randos conversations, they didn't have a church. Now they're in church, or they were in church and they found us later, et cetera, et cetera. And, one of the early questions I'll ask is, have you talked to your pastor about this? The pastor's, like pastor's too far up there in a large group. And it doesn't just mean a Protestant megachurch. It can be Catholic churches too. Orthodox churches are still fairly small. It'll be really interesting to see where that goes. But we're in this position of trying to find trust again, and it's going to be video by video, and Slop is going to add a whole new element to it. And maybe we are going to get to the point where it's only going to be in groups of people where we see them face to face. I think partly in a race against the machines, that even though on a little cell phone or something like that, we can see that, well, it's not going to be Not going to be any time, probably within my lifetime, that the cyborg is really going to fool me face to face, flesh to flesh in a room. That the android is going to pass for human. All right, that's enough. I'm going to have to go play Pastor Uber soon. Leave a comment.
Still I have it. There are moments I conveniently forget that I'm a 40-year-old man. The last vestiges of a ghost long dead. A ghost with a messiah complex. A messiah too lazy to rise or ascend. Happily hurt and hard. A hanger-on or haunting of a time past. A heroic dream of the harrowing of hell. Failure to launch. Cling to a life vest. Treading in spells that linger and last. Mom and Dad, righteous and mad, daydreamers with ghosts of their own. My memory of them stoic, looking with aims to pretend. Always on the brink of somewhere. Each a child dancing on the fence. On down the river. Dreamt in the sunshine. Saturday morning cartoons, the only Sabbath I knew. A disciple of Jim Henson and John Hughes. Worship in cathedrals where the Toys R Us. Baptized in ball pits. A clown served the sacrament we eat. More Pepsi and Pizza Hut. Say please. Say cheese. Between Kurt Cobain, a scrambled cable screen, towers tumbling, Super Bowls, and reality TV, the ghost is constitutionally unwilling and intrinsically unable to see and be seen, searching madly for attention to seek. But you could be anything. Never say never. If you've got nothing nice to say, don't say nothing, ever. Don't talk to strangers, see what I say, just do it. You don't listen very well, do you? You don't do very well, do you? You're not looking too good, are you? Keep up. Appearances aren't what they seem. Will you ever grow up? You look like you're stuck. You think you took too much. Echoes the ghost within the host who prays the dead bury their dead and stay buried in a fading dream.
Well, I don't know about the meaning crisis, left, right, black, white, or other vices, which Jesus Christ is right, or if we're all saved. From my perspective, our propositions participate procedurally, running in circles. Remember in body, we're in the age of decay. Symbolically speaking, the reapers are reaping, them damn egregores are whispering sweetly. We're all NPCs in the belly of the beast. Red pill, blue pill, bread pill, Mars Hill, or DMT, or whatever you feel. Got one and number two, it's all the same damn thing. So clean your room, repent on Zoom, Ontology for dummies, a bird's eye view. 'Cause if you really knew, could you really even say? Totally depraved, all totally saved. A total disposition from the bed we all made. Or is it the elect? Or are we just insane? From John Vervaeke to Jonathan Pajot and Jordan Peterson to the Chris Pacou Show. Paul Vanderklays and Griswold Grimm and all the dice he shakes. This estuary ditty is a little bit cringy, ain't quite the U-shaped or the hero's journey. All the NPCs in the flood treading water to watch you save the day with a bunch of chitter-chatter. From the ortho bros to the Catholic Joes or atheistic Jobs, to Protestant folks, the Joe Schmoes and Jewish Jacobs, and everything in between. So love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul, with all your mind and your fingers and toes, all your neighbors too, as if they were your own. So love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul, and with all your mind and your fingers and toes, all your neighbors too, as if they were your own.